Hello, this is old Mr. Kent of MrKent.com, and if this takeoff looks a little familiar, it's because in my last video, when I decided to delete the air control app from Aloft, I landed and I deleted it, and then I put a new battery in the drone and took off again. So it's actually 13 minutes after 13 minutes after the last takeoff, as you can see here, using my air data information. So anyway, I was just going to go for a little flight and just have a good time, because I hadn't flown for a little while. And so now I'm actually going, although this time I don't have a screen recorder because my tablet decided to, when I decided to delete anything, it stopped recording. So I thought it was still running, and so I took off. So anyway, everything worked fine. The compass at the bottom worked like it should, and everything worked great. So it's kind of the same video for the first couple of minutes here, and then it'll change. But what I do is I ride around the neighborhood on the streets in my e-bike, and I thought, well, I'm just going to fly around where I usually fly or usually ride. And so that's what I did on this video. And so anyway, while I'm doing that, I will also tell you one of my stories from 50 years or so ago, when I was a school teacher and teaching industrial arts. And I've told this story before, so I'll just briefly say, after I had taught drafting and metal shop for a couple of years, they told me next year I was going to be teaching electronics. And so that summer, I went to summer school, took a really good course from a really good instructor, and fell in love with electronics. So, and in that class, we learned about transistors and tubes and power supplies and things like that, which I had no idea about at the first. So, anyway, we had to make projects, and one of my projects was a power supply. And then that was pretty simple, but I also wanted to make a VOM, a volt-ohm meter. And if you don't know what that is, volts, it's a meter that measures voltage. So, if it's at 110 or 12 volts or something like that, it tells you what that voltage is. And then ohms is how resistance is measured. Every circuit has to have some resistance in it to keep the current from going full bore. Otherwise, you'd have a short circuit. So every circuit there is that works has some resistance, and sometimes you need to know how much resistance. So that was what one of those meters did. Now, here's one. This is a picture of one that they sell now for somewhere between $5 and $10. Back then, though, that was before any digital, it was before digital screens or anything like that. And so there was no way you could make a voltmeter. There's somebody down there walking across their field. I wonder if they noticed the drone flying over. But anyway, so you had to build a circuit that used a regular meter, that has a needle on it that goes up and around and all that. And back then, I would say every town had some kind of a little electronics store, where you could buy parts to build things. They don't exist anymore because there's so much stuff put into a chip that you just buy the chip now or something like that and order it, like my son does, who built me that nice clock with the weather information for the different airports. Anyway, so that's how they do. They don't have electronic stores anymore, so you wouldn't. But used to be you could go buy anything at an electronics store, and so I had to buy a meter and some switches and knobs and stuff. And then back then there was a magazine. I don't know, it might still be around. It was called Popular Electronics. And they had Popular Mechanics and Popular Electronics and Popular everything else. And so I'm sure that's the magazine I used. This is 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago, that I did this. So details are kind of fuzzy, but I think that's probably where I got the schematic. And they said use 5%. If you want accuracy, use nothing more than 5% of error. Like, if it's supposed to be 10 ohms, it has to be within 5% of 10 ohms. Otherwise, you won't get accurate readings. So, and a resistor, here's a picture of the old-fashioned, well, actually, they still use them, but not so much anymore. These are 10% resistors. They're within 10% of of the actual value. And so, I was working in the electronics shop in our lab, and I was going through all the resistors trying to measure to find something that was within 5%. And I mean, I must have been standing there for half an hour, 45 minutes, going through all the resistors that I needed to find one that was within 5%. Finally, the instructor came up and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to find a 5%, a resistor that's within 5%. And he pointed out, "You're going through the resistors that are only accurate within 5 to 10%. They're 10% resistors, and we don't have any 5%. So, in order to build my ohm meter and my voltmeter, my volt ohm meter, I had to use resistors that weren't quite as accurate. But back then, it really didn't matter a whole lot if I didn't get real accurate measurements, because something in the ballpark was good enough for me. So, and I had this, I had to buy a metal compartment to build it in, so I'd have something to carry around. So I had this, it was like a rectangular type container that had a clear plastic front. And then you mounted the meter and the knobs and places to plug in the wires, all in that plastic thing. So I worked on it and soldered it up, and I got it all together, and it actually worked. And I had different values of settings, like if you're going to measure, from, well, anyway, I won't go in there, but I could set it up so that different values were maximum value. So the higher the value, then the less accurate it is, and so forth. Long story short, I just got it made. And so now I had me a volt ohm meter, and I was so interested in electronics, I didn't care how accurate it was. I was going to use it for the rest of my life. So anyway, got out of summer school, went back to work teaching electronics, and I had this neighbor next door to where I lived, and his name was Rich, and I can't remember his last name, but a super, super nice guy, and he had a farm, and we helped him on his farm sometimes. I might have to tell that story sometime. Anyway, we helped him on his farm a lot with my students, went out and worked for him and stuff. And so he came along, and he came over, and he was working on his water heater, I think it was. And he asked me if I had a voltmeter. And so and I said, "Yeah, here's one. I made it, so be real careful with it, And so he said, "Okay, well, you don't measure, if you're going to measure voltage, you put it on the voltage setting. If you're going to measure resistance where there's no voltage at all, then you put it on the resistance setting." Apparently, my friend didn't quite understand how to use it, even though he said he did. So he took it home, and I don't know that many details anymore, but anyway, he took it home, and it wasn't, like maybe the next day I asked him if he still had my meter, and he kind of sheepishly said, "Yeah, I do." And now as we go around this corner, I want to show you something. We have these teenagers that go by our house really fast on their motorcycles. Now, up here, up in the upper left-hand, not in the corner, but just to the left of center, you'll see a guy ride out on a motorcycle, and he's got a real bright colored exhaust system on there. And so he's heading, I guess he's heading the opposite direction I'm flying, which doesn't matter. He's going to go, they always go over to the canal road, and there he comes down the canal. Or no, that's his buddy, but now you'll see there he comes down the canal road. So that's where that guy lives. Now I know. Anyway, so he had burned out. He had set the ohm meter to measure voltage, and that burned out my voltmeter. But that was okay. He was a nice guy. And so that's the story for today. I want to thank you for watching my video, and God bless.